My true story from Georgia. My son tried to burn me alive in the treehouse my husband built, all to claim the inheritance. But justice doesn't burn that easy. When you build something with your bare hands, you remember the weight of every nail. The little cuts, the splinters, the sweat that soaks into the wood. My husband and I built this house when our pockets were empty, but our hearts were full. We laid each brick of this Georgia farmhouse with dreams that stretched far beyond the harvest. The treehouse came later, after Robert was born. My husband called it our escape. He proposed to me under that oak. Years later, he built a home in its branches and gave it to me on our 40th anniversary. "When I am gone," he said, "this is where your memories will stay." It became my sanctuary. I kept everything in there, his letters, our photos, the deed to the land, my will, even the pressed corsage from my wedding dress. After he died, the silence was thick but peaceful. Until they came. Not to comfort, not to remember, to divide. Robert and Megan never cared much for land unless it had a price tag. They started visiting more often, pretending to check on me, but they would not even sit long enough for a cup of tea. They wandered the house like surveyors, their eyes always landing on the framed deeds and the safe under the staircase. Megan once paused at the painting of the treehouse and rolled her eyes. "This?" she scoffed. "That treehouse is worthless. Just like you. Rotting, smelling, and in the damn way." She said it with the ease of someone stepping on a cockroach. I looked at her. Her hair was perfectly flat-ironed, her nails polished like glass, her purse a $1,000 insult slung across her shoulder. I wondered if she had ever built anything in her life besides a lie. Robert stood nearby, arms folded, looking anywhere but at me. "You were supposed to die with Dad," he said finally. "But you just keep hanging around like a bad smell. Sign the papers and be useful for once." He pulled out a folder. Thick, glossy, clean, legal papers. More than I could read in a moment. I did not cry. I did not even blink. "Sign the papers," Megan repeated, "and we will make sure you stay comfortable. Otherwise—" She did not finish her sentence. She just smiled. I poured myself another cup of tea. I had stopped adding sugar the year my husband died. They thought silence meant surrender, that I was feeble. That age had softened me, like fruit left too long in the sun. What they forgot is that I used to work in a library. I catalogued the mistakes of history. I remembered everything. They did not notice the small recorder I kept beneath my sweater, the one that picked up Megan's words, word for word. They did not notice the way I slid the tea tray over the safe beneath the stairs as Megan lingered near it. They thought I was forgetting. I was documenting. When they left that afternoon, Megan slammed the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. I waited 10 full minutes before standing. My knees ached. My heart did not. I walked to the treehouse. The wood still smelled like him, cedar and tobacco. I ran my fingers along the beams and looked at the locked chest in the corner. They had no idea what was inside. I looked out over the fields we once plowed together. The land they wanted, the memories they had never earned. They thought I was alone, but I had one more move, and it had already begun. They told me it was just a quick trip into town, just some errands, Robert had said, smiling too wide for a man who never smiled unless he was trying to sell something. Megan stayed quiet during the drive, scrolling through her phone, her nails tapping like little clocks, counting down to something ugly. When we pulled into the back lot of a small strip mall, I already knew something was wrong. The so-called notary office was no more than a rented room behind a bakery that smelled of burnt bread and bleach. No signs, no receptionist, just a single metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and a man who introduced himself as Mr. Kent but never looked me in the eye. Robert held out a pen. "Mom, this is just a property management document, nothing binding. Just makes things easier for us to handle maintenance and taxes while you rest." I did not sit. I glanced down at the paper. Too many pages for something simple. Legal language, obscure references to land parcels, sub-paragraphs about transitional ownership rights. It was not a management agreement. It was a transfer of deed. To everything. The house, the land, the treehouse. Megan finally spoke with that smile she wore when she was about to say something cruel. "We hired a doctor to evaluate you. He is prepared to testify next week that you are not of sound mind. Once the court hears that, your signature won't matter anymore." She stepped closer. "This is your last chance to have a say, Alina. Sign it, and we will let you live out your days in peace. Refuse, and the court will decide for you. And believe me, it will not be in your favor." I looked at Robert. "My son. My flesh." He stared at his Rolex, the one that used to belong to his father. "Your hesitation is exhausting," he muttered. "You have become a liability, a glitch. I swear, you are just one loose stare away from being solved." I picked up the pen, not to sign, to steady my hand. The metal was cold, smooth, fingerprints on the grip. I glanced at the notary. He shifted in his seat but said nothing. "I will take it home," I said. "Look over it." Megan's face tightened. "No, you sign it now, Elena," I smiled. "You brought me to a place without a receptionist, without a witness, and you expect me to sign over 50 acres based on your word? You think I survived 79 years by being stupid?" Robert stepped closer. He lowered his voice. "Mother, you are making this harder than it needs to be. You are tired, alone. You are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly enough," I said. "Clearly enough to know that neither of you deserves one splinter of that land." The pen slipped into my purse as I gathered my coat. They did not notice. Too angry, too sure of themselves. Outside, the Georgia sun was low and hot. I walked slower than usual, letting them think it was weakness, letting them believe they still had time. That night, I placed the pen gently onto my scanner, rubber gloves on. I captured every angle, every ridge of Robert's fingerprints. I labeled the document, "Fraud Attempt August." I opened the safe under the stairs, removed the original deed, dated, notarized, signed by both my husband and me 15 years ago, and scanned it next. Then I wrote an email to Evelyn. We had not spoken in years, but old friendships with shared secrets do not wither. She had gone from protester to professor to practicing civil rights attorney. She once said I taught her to document everything. I told her it was time to return the favor. The subject line read, "Insurance, urgent." I attached the scans, the audio from my recorder, and a note. "They are trying to erase me. Here is my proof. I am not dead yet, but they want me to be." Before I slept, I lit a candle beside my husband's picture. He used to say I was too gentle, but he also said I had the sharpest memory of anyone he knew. I remembered everything, and now I had it all in writing. It was almost midnight when I heard it. The voices carried through the vent, whispers under the illusion of secrecy. Megan's voice first, sharp and hushed. "Leave her in the treehouse one night. Cut the power. Pour oil across the floorboards. The fire will look electrical. Perfect accident. No evidence. No guilt." Robert grunted. "You sure the insurance pays out without a body?" "She's 80. The ashes will speak for themselves." I did not scream. I did not shake. I sat in my armchair beneath my husband's portrait and looked straight into the lens hidden in the frame. A tiny red dot blinked once. It had recorded everything. That night, I did not sleep. I did not pray either. God and I had spoken enough over the years. Tonight was not for pleading. Tonight was for preparation. By morning, I had packed a single bag, essentials only, my ID, the original deed, the voice recorder, one photo of my wedding day, and the scarf I wore the day my husband was buried. I took a sewing needle and pressed it gently into the skin beneath my thumb, just enough to bleed. I smeared the blood onto the scarf, let it dry by the window, then folded it carefully over the back of the chair inside the treehouse. Next, I placed a vase of lilies, fresh from Megan's overconfident weekly deliveries, on the small table beside the treehouse window. Under the base, I secured a tracking beacon Evelyn had mailed me 3 years ago, just in case. I had joked then that it was paranoid. Now I was grateful. By 5 p.m., I walked out the back gate and did not look back. The convent was quiet, nestled among the pines 3 counties over. Evelyn greeted me at the edge of the chapel gardens, not with shock, not with tears, but with open arms. "I knew they would try something," she said. "I just did not expect fire." "They always choose fire," I replied. "It is easy to blame on faulty wires and weather." That night, I slept on a cot under a quilt stitched by hands older than mine. The peace in that room was real, but it was not forgiveness, not yet. The next morning, at exactly 6:44 a.m., Evelyn entered with her phone in hand. Her face was pale. They did it. The treehouse had burned overnight. The fire department arrived too late to save anything. Electrical fault, they claimed. Possible lightning strike, though the sky had been clear. They found the scarf first, blood on the fabric, singed, stuck to what remained of the rocking chair. No body, but the assumption was swift. Mrs. Lena Ransom presumed deceased. Robert and Megan cried on the local news. Megan dabbed her eyes behind sunglasses too large for grief. Robert clutched a framed photo of me from 2 decades ago, saying how Mom loved that treehouse. It was her safe space. I watched it all from the small television in the convent's kitchen. I did not shed a tear. Because the woman they mourned was not me. She was the ghost of a plan that failed. They thought I had no escape. They forgot who built the damn ladder in the first place. The funeral was swift, closed casket, empty of truth. I was not buried. I was watching. Waiting. I always knew Megan could not resist a party. The moment the insurance check cleared, $1.9 million to be exact, she booked the florist, the caterer, even the jazz quartet from downtown Savannah. She called it a celebration of life, but the invitations were gold-trimmed and boasted an open bar. Nothing about it smelled like grief. Robert was more discreet. While Megan preened in front of the mirror, he was on the phone with realtors. I want it listed by Monday, he said. No showings, no inspections, just cash offers. The land's old, the house older, but the equity is death tight. Sell fast, flip faster. He chuckled. Hell, call it historic. Say it belonged to a war widow or something. I watched the entire call unfold from Evelyn's laptop. The camera in the living room. Fern had a perfect view. His voice, his face, the gleam in his eyes. It was all there, caught in sharp resolution. That was the final file we needed. Georgia local news aired it all at 7:00 p.m. sharp, right before the weather. The anchor cleared her throat, looked dead into the camera, and said, "Tonight we bring you a story of inheritance, betrayal, and the voice of a woman presumed dead. But she is very much alive. And now, so is the truth." Then came the footage. My face filled the screen, wrinkled, yes, but unbroken. Behind me, the convent window glowed golden in the fading sun. I spoke plainly, without drama. If you're watching this, it means they think I'm gone. That the fire worked. That my memory died with the ashes. But I'm still here. And so is everything they tried to destroy. The footage cut to Megan's voice, recorded from the kitchen vent. Pour it across the floor. Electrical fire. Nobody questions it. She is half gone anyway. Then Robert, pacing in the hallway, unaware of the camera hidden behind the antique mirror. I want her out. One fall, one flame, and we're done. The video rolled on. Audio from the fake notary visit. Megan threatened legal guardianship. Robert referring to me as a walking liability. The moment I refused to sign. The click of the recorder in my purse, and finally the image of the pen he handed me. Robert's fingerprints, magnified, time-stamped, cataloged. Megan's party was in full swing when it aired. The band stopped playing midway through Fly Me to the Moon. A waiter dropped a champagne glass. One of the guests screamed. By 7:06 p.m., phones were ringing nonstop. Neighbors texting neighbors. Journalists circling like vultures with microphones. By 7:18, FBI field agents arrived at the property. I did not need to see the footage to know what happened next. I could picture it perfectly. Robert frozen with a tumbler of whiskey halfway to his lips. Megan scrambling for the remote, yelling at the screen to shut up, shut up, shut up. But the screen did not shut up, neither did I. Outside the gates of the farm, people began arriving. Old neighbors, women from the church, even strangers from towns over. They brought candles, some brought signs. Justice for Elena. Land is not worth blood. Believe the elderly. The camera crews caught the candlelight flickering against the home that was almost stolen. They called it a vigil, but it was more than that. It was a reckoning, not for me, for them. The courtroom doors opened with a creak, and every head turned. Some gasped. A few dropped their phones. But Megan collapsed. Right there, outside the defendant's bench, she dropped to her knees, like her bones had lost the will to hold her upright. The mascara she had carefully applied for sympathy began to smudge. One hand went to her mouth, the other to her heart. She stared at me like she was looking at a ghost. I was not a ghost. I was the reckoning. Robert stood frozen. His lawyer whispered something, but Robert did not move. He just stared as I walked down the aisle, alive, unburned, and unshakably calm. Judge Hopkins did not speak until I had taken my seat next to Evelyn. "This hearing is to determine if there is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial," he said. "The state may begin." Evelyn stood. In her charcoal gray suit, she looked like every man's worst nightmare. A woman with facts, evidence, and nothing left to lose. "Your Honor," she said, "we intend to prove that the defendants not only manipulated legal documents and forged signatures, but also conspired to commit murder for financial gain. Mrs. Lena Ransom, presumed dead, is alive, and so is every piece of evidence they never imagined we would collect." She began with the pen. "It looks ordinary," she said, holding it up. "But this pen, handed to Mrs. Ransom by her son, contains the fingerprints we needed. Taken from a forged property transfer Robert Ransom attempted to have her sign under false pretenses." Next came the footage. The fake notary office behind the bakery. Robert's voice, "Just sign the damn thing. You do not even know what day it is." Megan's whisper, "She'll be declared unfit by next week. Signature or not, we win." The judge's brow furrowed. The gallery murmured. Then came the audio clips. From the vents, the hallway mirror, the flower vase near the dining table. Megan again. "The fire takes care of the paperwork and the witness." Robert, laughing. "She and that moldy shack go up together. Call it poetic." Then Evelyn introduced the medical witness. "Ransom 1 week before the alleged incident," he testified. "She demonstrated advanced memory retention, critical thinking, and emotional reasoning far above the national average for her age." He paused, looked straight at Megan and Robert. "She is not confused. She is not weak. She is not unstable. She is dangerous if you wrong her." There were chuckles from the audience. Judge Hopkins silenced the room with a gavel tap. Finally, it was my turn. I did not go to the witness stand. Not yet. I simply stood from my seat beside Evelyn and faced them. I had rehearsed no speech. I did not need one. I opened my leather-bound journal. January 8th, I read. Robert said I was a burden, that every day I stayed alive cost him money. Megan laughed. I flipped the page. February 14th. They forgot my birthday, but they remembered to check the bank account. Another page. April 2nd. Robert said, "Mom, be useful for once. Just sign." Megan said, "Treehouse or cremation, either way you're dust." I closed the journal. "You wanted to erase me," I said, "but I recorded every word, every bruise, every betrayal." Silence again, the kind that makes men sweat in suits and women shift in their heels. Judge Hopkins finally spoke. "This matter will proceed to trial. There is overwhelming cause." Then, with deliberate calm, he turned to the bailiff. "Place the defendants under temporary custody, pending formal charges." The bailiff did not hesitate. The click of the handcuffs echoed like a bell of justice. Robert did not resist. Megan cried out, "She tricked us! She's lying! That old witch is lying!" No one believed her, because I was no longer just an old woman. I was evidence that refused to burn. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in truth. I had walked through those doors not as a grieving widow or a forgotten old woman, but as Exhibit A, living proof. Megan sat 2 rows down from the defense table, pale beneath a layer of courtroom-appropriate makeup. Her pearls were real this time, likely borrowed, perhaps out of guilt, but more likely out of strategy. Robert sat beside her, his once proud frame slumped like a child caught cheating on a test he thought he had written. They had dressed for pity. I had dressed for war. My navy blue suit was pressed and plain, my silver hair pulled back in the same tight bun I wore the day I buried my husband. In my hands, I held a small leather-bound journal, the one where I had recorded every insult, every threat, every appointment, every betrayal. Judge Hopkins called the court to order. The prosecution did not waste time. They played the recordings again, the voice of Megan suggesting fire, of Robert laughing about my usefulness expired, the video of the fake notary setup. The insurance documents with forged signatures, the voice memos, the GPS evidence, the blood-soaked scarf planted for sympathy. Then they brought up Evelyn. She was calm, articulate, and absolutely devastating. Mrs. McMurray. Ransom was lucid, organized, and fully competent when she came to me, Evelyn testified. She remembered dates, laws, case precedents. She had already drafted contingency plans before I even said the word will. Then came the doctor, a neurologist independent and state-certified. There is no clinical evidence of dementia, he said plainly. Her cognitive faculties are entirely intact. Any diagnosis suggesting otherwise was either fabricated or incompetent. Megan's lawyer tried to object. Judge Hopkins shut him down with a single raised eyebrow. When they called me to the stand, I did not cry. I did not falter. I read directly from my journal. November 12th, Robert handed me a pen and said, "Just sign, Mother, be useful for once." November 16th, Megan whispered in the kitchen, "Let the shack burn." So does she. November 21st. I left through the east gate. I did not look back. I closed the book. You wanted to erase me, but I recorded every word, every bruise, every betrayal. Silence followed. Not the heavy, awkward kind, the kind that settles like a final note after a song no one can follow. Then came the verdict. On the charges of attempted murder in the first degree, guilty. On the charges of insurance fraud and falsifying legal documents, guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. Robert closed his eyes. Megan let out a dry, gasping sound that might have been a sob or a scream. The judge continued, voice firm as steel. Robert Ransom and Megan Ransom are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. He paused, then added the part that truly mattered. All inheritance rights are permanently revoked. All claims to the Ransom estate nullified. All properties, deeds, and financial assets are hereby restored in full to Mrs. Lena Eleanor Ransom. People talk about winning in court like it is some moment of glorious eruption. But victory, true victory, is quieter than you think. It does not come with applause. It comes with stillness. A stillness so sharp, so pure, it slices through the years of being dismissed, disrespected, and discarded, and leaves only truth standing. I stood as the judge dismissed us. My legs were steady. The bailiff asked if I needed assistance down the steps. I smiled. No, son. I built those steps. The land never forgot. Even after fire, betrayal, and silence, the roots held. That spring, the peach trees bloomed brighter than they had in a decade. I took it as a sign. Not from God, perhaps, but from him, my husband, the man who built our treehouse with his bare hands and called it our sky chapel. He would have wanted that place to mean something more than smoke and lies, so I gave it a new life. I donated the north pasture and what remained of the treehouse clearing to establish a refuge, the Treehouse Haven, a community sanctuary for elderly women who had endured neglect, abuse, and the kind of erasure that leaves no bruises but scars just the same. The press came, of course. They always do after the fire's gone out. But the opening ceremony was not about me. It was about the women who sat in those folding chairs beneath the magnolia trees, wearing worn shawls and tired eyes. Women who had been forgotten, until now. Lily stood beside me on that stage, my granddaughter, the only one who visited me when the others stopped pretending. She held a small piece of paper, hands trembling like mine used to, and then she read her poem. Her roots were fireproof. Though the winds howled greed and the flames licked memory, she stood, quiet, ash-covered but unburned. There was a stillness afterward, then clapping, then tears. The mayor shook my hand. A senator sent flowers. The dean of my old university showed up unannounced, pressed a medal into my palm, and whispered, "You never stopped teaching." I suppose that is true. I had taught them law once. Now I had taught them proof, that silence is not surrender, that old age is not irrelevance, that justice, when patient, is a blade honed by memory. Inside the center's library, we placed the original journal, the one I read from in court. Bound in leather, sealed behind glass. Above it, a plaque. Ruth Eleanor Ransom, she remembered. And still, I did not weep. There were quilts to sew, bread to bake, and gardens to tend. The women needed routine as much as they needed sanctuary. They told me things they had never told their children. He took my pension. She left me in a shed behind the house. No one believed I could still think for myself. And I listened. Because sometimes the most radical act of love is believing someone still matters, especially when no one else does. Every week, Lily comes to visit. She helps with the reading circles, brings muffins, and kisses my forehead like I am the child now. She calls me her iron-rooted grandma. And when she leaves, I sit by the old tree stump where the house once stood. I still hear the creak of its boards in my dreams, not as a haunt, as a hymn. Because the house may have burned, but the story never did. The boards beneath my chair creak gently as I rock, the scent of cedar and rain-washed soil rising from the porch. The sun slips low behind the hills, draping everything in gold, the same kind of light that once danced through the windows of our treehouse. This porch, it is not new. It is rebuilt from the charred wood we salvaged from the wreckage. Evelyn said I was stubborn to keep it, but I wanted it close. I wanted to sit on something that had survived, something, like me, that still stood. Lily's head rests in my lap. Her hair smells like lilac and sugar cookies. Her fingers twirl the frayed edges of the blanket I knitted during the trial. She does not say much. She never needs to. Her presence is loud in the way silence can be, a comfort, not a weight. Behind us, from the clearing where the treehouse haven now stands, come the sounds of children laughing. A bell rings from the community garden. Someone sings an old hymn near the fire pit. Life, soft, chaotic, and real, has returned to this land. And still I rock. I hold a book open on my knee. It is not for reading. I have read this one 100 times, but the pages feel like company. And tonight, I like the idea of being surrounded by words. They tried to burn my story, I whisper, mostly to myself. Lily stirs. But they forgot, I continue, eyes on the horizon. I had already written it in stone. She lifts her head, looking up at me like I hung the sunset. You wrote more than a story, Grandma, she says. I smile. I do not say it aloud, but I know what she means. I wrote survival. I wrote truth. I wrote the ending they never expected. One where the old woman did not die, did not disappear, and did not surrender. One where she told the world everything. The wind rustles the magnolia trees, a firefly lands on the porch railing and blinks like it is nodding in agreement. I take a deep breath. I am not angry anymore. Not at Robert, not even at Megan. They tried to turn legacy into leverage. They mistook kindness for weakness. They thought old meant over. They forgot that I was not just their mother. I was a wife, a teacher, a fighter, a documentarian of every unspoken word. And now, I am free. The cicadas begin their nightly chorus. The sky turns lavender. Lily leans her head back down. I wrap the blanket tighter around her. Tomorrow, we will bake cornbread for the center. Tomorrow, I will teach a class on record-keeping for the new volunteers. I used to think life ended around 75, that after the children stopped calling and the aches settled in like old roommates, the rest was just borrowed time. Quiet mornings, slow meals, and waiting for someone to notice you were gone. I was wrong. This morning, I tied a silk ribbon in my hair. Evelyn helped me with my shoes. My legs are not what they used to be, but my spine, still straight, still mine. Today, Lily is getting married, and I am almost 100 years old. I sat on the edge of the bed this morning, holding a photograph in my hand. My husband, Thomas, God, what a man. He was 27 in the picture, sunburnt nose, sleeves rolled up, grin full of sawdust and dreams. That was the day we finished the frame of the treehouse. He carved our initials into the beam, T+R 1961, then kissed me like the world was brand new. 60 years later they tried to burn that beam, but Lily, she had it salvaged and turned into a bench. Today, that bench sits outside the church where she will walk down the aisle. I will sit on it. I will run my fingers along the old scar of our carving, and I will remember. When I was younger, weddings made me think of promises. Now, they make me think of presence. The sheer miracle of still being here, of watching someone you love find the kind of face they want to wake up next to every morning for the rest of their lives. Lily asked me to walk with her to the doors of the church. She has a father, of course, but she said, "Grandma, it was you who showed me what real love survives. I want you to be the last person I see before I become a wife." So I will walk with her. Not quickly, not with fanfare, just two women, one young and glowing, one older and glowing differently, making their way down the hallway of time together. When she came to my room this morning, she knelt beside my chair in her dress, ivory lace, soft as breath. Her eyes were glassy, but she smiled. "I feel safe because you're here," she whispered. I did not cry, but I felt something warm and ancient swell in my chest, the kind of pride that belongs not to the moment, but to the years behind it, to every bedtime story, every pot of soup on the stove, every night I stayed alive for her when no one else thought I should. They said I was useless. They said I was in the way. They said old women like me should be quiet, should be grateful, should just go. But today, I sit in the front pew. I am dressed in midnight blue. My cane rests beside me, carved from a branch of the old oak that used to hold our treehouse. And when the doors open and Lily steps forward, the entire room rises, not just for her, for what she carries, for what she comes from, for every root that refused to burn. She walks slowly, not because she is nervous, but because she wants to remember. Every flower, every face, every moment she will never repeat again. Her groom waits at the altar, tall, kind, a little nervous, but his eyes, oh, his eyes never leave her. And as she reaches him, she turns, not to wave, but to wink. At me. I laugh out loud. The whole room hears it. I do not care. I am too old to be embarrassed by joy. They say a wedding is for the young, but let me tell you something. The old understand it better. We know what vows cost. We know what keeping them feels like on the worst day, not just the best. We know that love is not loud. It is patient. It is small. It is steady. It is the warm cup of tea when the world has gone cold. After the ceremony, Lily brings her bouquet to me. I hold it like an heirloom. She kisses my forehead and says, "One day I will tell my daughter about you." I chuckle. "You better wait a few years before you go making promises like that," I say. We both laugh. And then I tell her I was not always this wrinkled. Tell her I used to climb trees and raise hell. Tell her I got burned but never turned to ash. Tell her I remembered everything, and that remembering was how I survived. As the sun sets on her wedding day, I sit once more on that bench outside the church. Lily dances under string lights. The music plays something old, Patsy Cline, I think, or maybe Billie Holiday. I hum along, eyes closed. I can hear Thomas's voice in the back of my mind. "You did good, Elena." And I smile, because I know I did. I did not just outlive them. I outloved them. I outlasted every lie, every scar, every night they thought would break me. And I am still here, 99 years old, watching a girl I love begin her forever. That is more than survival. That is victory. And to all of you listening, let no one convince you that your final chapters must be quiet, that your story ends when they stop inviting you to the table. Sometimes the best part comes when they think the book is closed. This is not just Lily's wedding. This is mine. To life, to legacy, to every woman who stayed silent until now. Thank you for staying until the end. If you heard every word I just spoke, then you know this was never just a story about fire. It was about memory, about roots, about refusing to disappear, no matter how many times they tried to erase me. They thought I was just an old woman in a rocking chair, waiting for her name to be carved on a stone. But I carved my own name, in truth, in legacy, in love that did not beg to be seen, but demanded to be remembered. My son tried to burn me alive. He set fire to the very house where his father once promised me forever. He wanted to replace vows with ashes. But he forgot one thing. I built that treehouse with my bare hands, and long before I was a grandmother, I was a fighter. Now, near 100 years old, I do not shake when I speak, I do not hide when I remember, and I do not forgive what was never sorry. But I am not bitter. No, I am grateful. Grateful that I lived long enough to tell the truth. Grateful that I had Lily to remind me that not all love gets lost in inheritance. Grateful that when I stood in court, the world listened, not because I shouted, but because I refused to be silent. And now, I ask you, what stories live in your grandmother's silence? What truths sit quietly on her porch, waiting to be asked? What pain has she wrapped in kindness, hoping someone might notice before it is too late? If you have a grandmother still breathing, still remembering, do not wait for her to raise her voice. Sit beside her, hold her hand, and say, "I am listening now." Because some stories will only be told once, and when you hear them, really hear them, your own story begins to change. So if my voice reminded you of someone you miss, if my fire lit a spark in your own memory, then I invite you to do one small thing. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, not because I want followers, but because there are more of us, women who have waited a lifetime to be heard, and now, one by one, we are speaking. With cracked voices, with trembling strength, with everything we remembered while you were not looking. This is not the end. This is the beginning of what was always true, and I will keep telling it, until every grandmother who was ever betrayed gets the justice her silence deserves. Because justice, my dear, does not burn that easy.